You and I know work is changing.
Yes, AI is coming in to fundamentally replace what I feel is my value add to the company.
Stephanie Shabazz is an AI adoption leader and 2X TEDx speaker who partners with executives to rip the Band-Aid off and confidently lead through AI transformation.
What I've been telling people is don't even wait until you have the degree.
She specializes in designing human-centered AI strategies that elevate performance and future-proof teams.
We really have to start to think proactively about how we're thinking about the workforce in the age of AI.
I've spent 2 decades guiding CEOs and founders to scale and reimagine what's possible. Now, the biggest shift of our lifetime is here, AI. I'm Seema Alexander, founder of Disruptive AI, co-chair of DC Startup and Tech Week, and the host of the AI CEO podcast. If you're ready to learn how AI is transforming industries, creating new growth, and rewriting the rules of business, this is the podcast for you. Because the truth is, the leaders who adapt now won't just survive, they'll define the future. Let's tap in. Welcome to today's episode of the AI CEO podcast. My name is Seema Alexander, and I am your host. And I have the glamorous, insanely brilliant Microsoft adoption lead and AI consultant and educator and strategist, Stephanie Shabazz, with me today. Welcome to the podcast, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me. I have been waiting on pins and needles. Super excited, one, to connect with you and to just talk about today's topic.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Of course. You and I connected at Thanksgiving.
Right.
Last year, right?
Yeah,
Last
right.
year. This ecosystem in the DMV is amazing. It brings together a lot of great minds on different things when it comes to emerging tech and startup. And then we connected after that.
That's right.
And we realized that we had so much synergy.
Yes, absolutely.
And have had multiple conversations since. And the specialty that you have, I think, is going to be so timely right now, this minute, for this conversation. I know in your experience, you have done a lot of work in recruiting and HR and workforce planning.
That's right.
And then your specialty then intersects with AI.
Yes.
And, I'm going to pause for a second there, because what I know that you and I know is work is changing.
Yes, 1,000%. 1,000%. Well, first, I want to be able to say thank you. You are one of the people who creates a platform for so many and really having necessary conversations. And I'm a big advocate of giving people their flowers when there's the opportunity to do so. So huge privilege. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. And yes, workforce is changing fundamentally. And I think for us as leaders, if we are really going to lean into where things are, not where they're going to be, where they are today, we really have to rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak, and start to think proactively about how we're thinking about the workforce in the age of AI.
Yeah, so let's just get right into it.
That's right.
The reality is you and I, with, I would say, a small group of people, know too much. At the same time, adoption rates, a lot of people say they're starting to use and starting to tinker, but adoption rates are low when it comes to really thinking through strategically and intentionally around AI for many reasons, right? I think part of it's human behavior.
Yep.
So, the conversation around workforce and where this future is going to go, there's a lot happening today, but do people realize that? What are you actually seeing in the market right now? If I was a CEO or a business leader, that I should be thinking about around workforce planning?
Absolutely. So first thing I would say is your team's already using it. They just may not be telling you, and they may not be feeling comfortable about doing it within their jobs because they may be concerned, I may create something that could eventually replace me. So what I invite every leader, CEO, I actually had a recent conversation with the CEO around this, is having an opportunity to have open conversation that's not necessarily tied to a metric yet or ROI yet. Just hearing where the individuals on your team are and getting boots on the ground feedback, because that's going to give us insight on the blueprint of where we're going. I was having another conversation around thinking around AI adoption planning at a global scale. If we recognize that most people maybe have used ChatGPT once or twice, but there's so much more that we know is available from an AI perspective, where can we start there? to then bring the water level up for our workforce environment to be able to talk about what can we practically leverage now, how can we bring folks along, and how can we make sure that we're giving them the insights and perspectives, not just, hey, take AI and run ahead with it, but this is how we can really think about using it proactively from a leadership perspective.
Okay, so I know I have a bunch of questions and we've talked about it, but I'm just going to have a conversation with you.
Let's do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just get into the brass tacks. I mean, there's a lot of leadership that doesn't know what they don't know about this technology, right? This is literally why I do this podcast. It's why you're an educator, because there's so much unknown. So even before we get into the employee side, and I agree with you, I think everyone has now, not everyone, but I mean, it's a technology that is scaled substantially in terms of usage personally, right? So there's some exposure, at least concepts with the employees and just playing with it. But where do you see, because you're an adoption lead, right? It's kind of what you do, like, where is that literacy or fluency with leadership today, and what's missing?
So I see 3 specific buckets of where I see from a leadership perspective we are from an AI adoption standpoint. So you have the Dabbler. And I'm even going to go deeper and say the hidden Dabbler, because they may project that they're feeling confident about AI, because we do that from a leadership perspective. We try to, at least emote curiosity, but behind the scenes, they've really only touched it a bit. They really haven't started to think proactively about what can this mean as a market differentiator for my team and for my business. So you have the Dabbler, and then you have someone I call the curious investigator. So maybe they've started to ask more pointed questions. Maybe they've brought an engineer along from their team to really see where it could be leveraged, but they're feeling overwhelmed. That's where I think the most of our leaders and the people that I talk with is that it can feel so overwhelming, especially as we think about navigating the workforce planning piece, that a lot of leaders are kind of in that curious investigative state, but they haven't really determined how to convert it into actual ROI. And then you have a small group, but it's growing, of the leader adopter. So this is the person who is really rethinking about how we look at workforce, and hopefully we'll get to this later on, is not just considering the human measure, but how are we thinking about humans plus agents? How are we looking at the data that agents can bring in and the human piece that is necessary from a workforce and just cultural perspective within a company? So those are the 3 groups, and I think that's where we're seeing our leaders kind of fill into those buckets.
I love the framework, and I think probably anybody listening to this podcast can probably easily put themselves in one of those buckets, right? And so I would like to go deeper, though. So I mean, the hidden Dabbler, as you mentioned, that's very interesting, because on the outside, this is where I hear a lot from the work we do is like, we're getting all the pressure and we have to get AI put in something, and so they feel like they're just going to slap something on, or they're afraid of it. They don't know the full circumstance. But how do you move the Dabbler to become more curious? So let's start there and what you've seen, because this is kind of like that other stage of when technology is crossing the chasm.
That's right.
Right? Because they're always going to be early adopters. But then when things start to cross, that's when a little more mainstream adoption is starting to happen. So where in this moment in time, almost like how do you nurture somebody as a Dabbler to become curious? What have you seen?
That's right. 3 areas I would take a look at. First, and when someone's a curious Dabbler, that's usually where they're like, hey, Steph, can we talk through this? First is who's in your AI brain trust? And what I mean by AI brain trust is who's around that table behind the scenes where you can get really raw and real about where you are as a leader and what you're seeing as the opportunity gaps. Because in full transparency, growth is only going to happen if we take a moment to slow down. We've got to slow down to speed up from a growth perspective. And honestly, that's where I see a lot of leaders struggle. It doesn't feel like there's time to slow down to learn, but that's necessary so that we're not making costly mistakes down the line, right? So who's at your AI brain trust? Is it just your CTO, or do you have a communication specialist to help with the messaging? Do you have a strategist to really take a look at your workflows? Do you have someone who can come in from an ethics perspective to see how are we using this responsibly? The second piece, if you're moving as a Dabbler into that more curious state, is really taking a look at current state of workflows today. What is working within this systems planning process? So I'll give an example. Recently talked to a CMO, and they were really looking at being able to bring AI into their current workflows. So they had,
this is a conversation I have all the time.
This is where we
very
are,
curious.
Right? Absolutely. And so even a few months ago, folks
Yeah.
were maybe leveraging GPT with an input from their prompting that would then generate something they could use for a caption or for a product marketing launch.
GPT for anybody, you know,
Oh,
that's
yes, thank
part
you.
of ChatGPT. You can create your own customized GPT, call
right.
it an agent within the system, and then use it and incorporate prompts so
That's
that
right.
it's like a role, which then can take over some of the tasks.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
thank you so much for
Yeah.
that. So yes, being able to have their own customized agent using ChatGPT,
Right.
and that's what they were using to be able to amplify and accelerate how they were creating their marketing strategy. But as she and I were chatting, there was still an opportunity to take a look at even how are we ideating around marketing? Who are we thinking about from an audience perspective, and how can we be able to move the needle looking at it from a data analysis? So it wasn't just that we had a content generator. How are we then allowing AI to give us feedback on the data so we can make decisions a lot more quickly? And once we kind of looked at that, she was able to see a 60% increase in how quickly they were able to have outcomes. So that was something I wanted to add in that piece
Yeah,
too.
no, that's great. But I guess when I go back to the Dabbler,
That's right.
what I always feel like people need to see, it's almost shock and awe. Like, show me and let me understand what this technology can do for me,
Yeah.
or do for my employees, or do for the business. Show me it's possible.
Right.
And then I'll become even more curious because, wow, you just showed me something that I didn't believe was possible.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's what we've seen is like, this took me X amount of time and now
Yeah.
it's taking me seconds. Like, or I see all these generative AI tools that I'm getting targeted. I don't know what's real and what's not, but if I actually tried something,
That's
then,
right.
you know, I get to start to move from, I'm tinkering finally.
Absolutely.
So I guess one last piece there is, how do you encourage them to tinker?
It's good. So that would be where I invite folks to bring people along in their team who are actually working on it right now. I actually came out with what I call the AIM framework. So it's assess where your team is right now. So if there's someone that's actually using AI on a consistent basis, or they're able to leverage it in a way that makes sense, bring them into the conversation. You don't have to be the one to always ideate. And then I is identify what is the workflow that's going to have real ROI. So for example, someone I talked to recently, they've had a sales team that's kind of doing sales the same old way, right? It's at an enterprise level, so they're really kind of having worked with established clients. But they were able to bring in Clay AI. They were able to leverage that. They had specific lead information, and now they were able to see up to a 50% increase in close rate and a conversion that was higher than what had been previously used. So get in there, get the numbers, get the data, and then finally being able to measure and continue to move the momentum forward. If I can show you data, right? If I can show you as a team or as an individual contributor as part of my team, from a leadership perspective, I've now gained buy-in.
Okay. So
Yeah.
then now look, I'm in the curious state.
Yep.
But I feel like some of the frameworks that you shared could be more in the curious state than in the Dabbler state.
Sure.
And I'm just curious. Yeah, you know, only because like the core things I've seen is people need to see what's possible so that they can start to move, and then or else they're getting pressure.
Right, right.
And I think that pressure is coming from inside forces, board forces, all the things. But from your perspective, where should the pressure be coming from? What's realistic for these founders, CEOs, business leaders to know this is actually happening right now behind the scenes when it comes to workforce?
Yeah.
Because I don't think people see the urgency.
Absolutely. The pressure is coming from how we're thinking about our workforce planning and the people that need to be doing this versus what needs to be done by AI. The pressure is also coming from employee sentiment. People are nervous. And the more you can be able to have a guided conversation that we as leaders are having around AI usage, the more bought in and curious your team will be. Conversely, if you're leading from the perspective of uncertainty or maybe saying something that you've heard before, right? We hear hey, we're going to leverage AI to be able to automate. Well, as an employee, I may hear that as you're working extra hard to replace my job.
Yeah.
That doesn't galvanize, that doesn't encourage. And so that's really where I'm seeing the pressure come in, is when leaders are perhaps making statements that they haven't really thought about the data behind it or how we can be able to integrate our employees into the conversation versus kind of coming in and just stating how we want to move forward.
Okay, so this is a perfect segue, right? It's yes, and we've talked about this a little bit on the pod, but your perspective is going to be very interesting because that is a reality for
Yeah.
people.
Sure.
You know, everything is happening real time. They're figuring out their stance and potentially if they're curious or not. But like employees are going to feel, not everybody, some employees understand, but most employees, there is still that uncertainty. Every time I do a talk about like why AI is bigger than the average on the internet, by the time they walk out, they're like, okay, I feel more confident and understand what the possibilities are.
Sure.
So what's your take for a leader to like what should their stance be with their employees when they're in that curious state? So they're not clear yet. They don't know the vision, right? But they know all this stuff is happening. So what should the current comm strategy be?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example of what not to do.
Oh, I love it. That's even better.
I was recently working with a CEO, and we had a post conversation because he basically had a town hall, and the title of the town hall is how AI will be moving forward to replace drudgery. Now, I know on the surface,
interesting word.
Yeah, exactly. So on the surface, that sounds like, oh, that's a pretty good way to approach it. But when we polled user sentiment, the feeling at the end of the day was, well, I don't consider that to be drudgery. That's a fundamental part of my job. I don't consider that to be something that is a waste of time. That's actually something that I put a lot of energy and time into. And so the way that messaging landed with that team was, AI is coming in to fundamentally replace what I feel is my value add to the company. And so we had to then think through a strategy of how do we rephrase, and I'll share a little bit about that rephrasing strategy. How do we rephrase and realign on how we think about AI? And so the listening tour was then a resulting conversation around what is actually something that instead of drudgery can just be automated? What takes up a lot of your time, especially at that administrative level, that can be done more quickly? And then what can we do with the time that is now being freed up? I'll let you.
Yeah, you're ready to jump right in. Jumping at the bit here.
That's good.
The word that came to mind was perspective.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because so many of us in sort of the industry could be like, you know, AI is going to be your superpower. It's going to augment everything that you do. But at the end of the day, and this is the interesting dichotomy of AI and work, right? It's like people want to feel valued, seen, and heard. It's just the human beings. That's who we are, right? And once you start taking away something that they think their contribution is added to, even though it might be tedious and laborious for them, but if they're actually connecting identity and worth to it, that's a very different perspective.
Absolutely.
Than, hey, you know, I know that takes you a long time. Let me help you.
That's
so you don't have to do that. But then but that's the reality of what's going to happen.
That's right.
And I think this is also, look, I came from corporate America. I've done the entrepreneurial thing. I've had different sort of unique perspectives all along. And, you know, in every emerging tech cycle, and a lot of the seniors at different times, and I don't want to just say it's just there's a gap between generations, right? And some
that's
folks,
a whole different.
Yeah, but it's important, right?
Important,
because there's avoidance of trying to leverage technology, and they feel more almost like their knowledge, their processes are the right processes, right? And so if some technology is going to come take that away, it almost feels forced upon.
That's right.
Versus this is my idea, this is thoughts that okay, like, and I guess that's the question in this. How do we convert an employee who feels like that to see the value and what AI can bring to them?
Got you. I love that. So I'll say something that's going to sound a bit controversial, and then I'll kind of walk you through that. So I don't think we can necessarily strategize policy and process around feeling only, because that is a never-ending cycle that is not going to help us be able to move together as an industry or a company. I do think we have to be aware of the feelings and be able to redirect, or as we talked about in the presentation standpoint, be able to redirect from feeling to what fuels you. Every conversation that I have with a leader first is how well do you have a sense of what fuels your employees, what motivates them, and how can we use that to be able to make sure that that is what we're bringing to the table with AI. So for example, a lot of the, I was talking to a CEO recently, and they had individuals who just kind of put suggestions on how to use AI into a survey form. And so there was a lot of initial energy around that because people had ideas and they felt really excited about it, but because there was no tie into OKRs. There wasn't necessarily a clarity around how is this going to actually drive towards our business. It was launched,
fell
and
flat.
Fell flat, right? As opposed to what fuels you.
Right.
Are you fueled by the ideation stage? Or maybe you are an active dissenter. You're the person who's going to poke holes in a system. That's necessary as well when you think about a product management standpoint. So what I would encourage someone who is working with an employee who's really feeling that, maybe the AI process may leave them behind is what fuels you. And I'm going to let you jump in from that standpoint.
One of the groups that we're partnered with, they have a innovation sort of survey. So for example, they go into companies and they're like, you have a big R&D product or project. What's the right dynamic team to bring together that is going to make that the most successful?
Right.
So they had these surveys and sort of personality tests and like very proprietary stuff they've done for years and years.
Nice.
And I chatted with them. I said, can we convert that into more of an AI adoption survey? And here's what I mean by that. Because there are companies that are, everyone needs to be upskilling. We can talk a lot about that a little later. But there are people in your organization that are going to be early adopters of these things. There are people in your organization that are going to be advocates and show things and like kind of be leaders in that space. There are going to be people who are ideators. There are going to be people who are going to poke holes, to your point, right?
That's right.
Why wouldn't you focus on them first versus everybody and have an everybody strategy in terms of comms?
Sure.
But let's get clear. And this is actually an HR question, a policy question, and like your unique perspective. I'm really curious here.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, to help with sort of, again, adoption, do you try to go to the masses first, or do you start with a smaller group that you feel like will get it, will help kind of be advocates internally, almost like brand ambassadors, AI ambassadors?
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that with you.
Absolutely. So I would say the way that I have seen it work best is if it's not necessarily the early adopters only, it's the influencers on your team.
That's right.
There are individuals who carry a lot of weight. Even if they're individual contributors, they carry a lot of influence on that team. And I really challenge leaders to think about that multi-generationally. So especially if your early adopters maybe fit a certain generation or a certain demographic, how are we actively, and just for insight, this is going to be the people who do respond to your survey. They're going to be the ones who do have strong opinions.
Right.
They're going to be the ones who are usually leaning into the conversation. They carry a lot of influence oftentimes with them. Those are the individuals that you want to use almost like your sample group for your MVP of your AI adoption strategy. Because how they evangelize it when you're not in the room, the discussions that happen in the side channels are going to be led by these individuals, and that's really where you're going to see the overall adoption strategy take place.
I've seen, and I've had lots of conversations with both startup growth companies and larger mid-sized companies. Corporate's not really where I focus. But what's also interesting with some of the startup groups, and these are like not fully startup, they have 50, 100 employee type folks. They're like, you know what we did? We got everybody in a room. We started doing that exercise of what's the most laborious, what's the stuff that takes, is repetitive, starting getting everybody into this employee hackathon. Right? And he gave people permission to play and tinker with AI to figure out what's best for our company. And the frame was that if we don't do something, we will be disrupted.
That's right.
Which means you won't have a job.
That's right.
Which means we won't have a business.
Right.
So it was framed in a way that I need your help as much as you need ours. And we want to be on the top of our game. Right? We want to be leaders in our space. How can we become more efficient and more automated and more innovative in this industry and work together doing it? And it really, and I remember because I was on this panel with like 100 CFOs and comptrollers in this room for this association. And one of the women who's coming up to me talking about like Virgin, all the things, right? Like, and he goes, like almost like you can also do this way, right? And which I loved, right? Because I think there is this beauty and organicness of it, as long as you understand the technology and how to get there.
Yes.
And I think that's the gap. But in general, what are your thoughts on that, right? Where it's like, because he's like, going back to ROI, he's like, we're 30 to 40% higher in ROI, everybody, and so I'm just curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, I love that. And that's 100% what I recommend with teams as well. I also encourage leaders to even put some incentives behind those hackathons because what encourages a creative, innovative product manager on your team to create it internally or to go launch it on their own? Why not have that own internal brain trust within your team, be able to offer incentives? I've actually talked with someone recently and I said, hey, if you can be able to have your product team start to have maybe just a couple of hours on a Friday where they can be able to tinker, to be able to explore, to walk through those ideas, I think those are the things that make the best way that we can be able to bring products to the table.
Yeah.
And then have a dotted line for someone who is a forward-thinking security protocols leader. Because that's the only other thing that I would say from that perspective is as you're ideating, having someone who's also able to walk through, especially when it comes to data privacy, when it comes to the information that's so internal for your company.
Yeah.
So we can ideate, we're not putting parameters or limitations on that, but we want to also make sure that you have that moat maintained for your company.
Yeah, I love that. In the last couple of podcasts, I've had like cybersecurity folks.
Right.
Last one, the one's getting actually launched today, is 2 legal professionals. Because
Nice.
the biggest question I get, Stephanie, is like, hey, I understand where this is going. I just
Right.
don't want to be in the news three years from now.
That's right.
I want to do this
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think even that frame is amazing. I want to do this right.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
And I think that's where also becomes like, all right, how do I do this right? Like, what does that even look like when things are moving so fast?
Yeah. I feel very strongly about this from an HR and workforce planning perspective, because doing it right takes vulnerability. Sharing where you are as a leader in your own personal journey is key. It gives others permission, the opportunity, and the value of leaning along with you. The second piece when it comes to workforce planning piece is don't promise something you really cannot guarantee or deliver on. I have seen, Seema, so many times individuals in an effort to galvanize, they use phrases like, yes, no, you're never going to see your role go away, or that's never going to change. And to be honest, if anyone can tell you where they know AI is going to be in the next 3 to 5 years, they have a good sense, but they may be guessing a good portion of that. And
Can we pause there for one
Yeah.
second? I mean, that's a really important insight.
That's huge.
You know, as a leader of an organization, a business leader, a new entrepreneur, right? It's like if you say your role is not going to change, your role is always going to be here, that may not be true.
That's not true. That's not true.
And I think
right.
one of the things that I've seen, you know, again, I always anchor stuff back to the internet, right?
Yep.
It's like when you're in the middle of the 90s and the internet's starting to rise, we never knew what roles were going to come out of that.
That's right.
And the distinction of like what used to be doesn't mean this is sort of the way the workflows and all those things are going to be. And you know, you and I are going to get into agents and humans in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But so I love that, and I think it's a really important thing from a comm strategy.
That's right.
To be honest and transparent. But then let's play devil's advocate.
Sure.
I hear that as an employee. I get it, kind of. Like, you know, I get, yeah, my role may evolve. There may be technology associated to it. What's still making me nervous? Like, what can get me over the hump to be on board?
As an employee, kind of switching roles right now, what I also need to hear is where is the investment in my growth and upskilling so that as this continues to evolve, I can be in the conversation and the one helping to drive it versus the one who kind of has to stand back and wait for whatever AI results in, right? So there has to be both and. There has to be that open transparency and the honesty about the fact that most roles will fundamentally evolve. And we are invested in your growth, and we're invested in your upskilling. We're invested in helping you think creatively just as you have been. We wouldn't be here without you. And the same way that you've been able to lean in with curiosity before, we're invested in helping you think about that going forward.
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts there. One, could not agree more.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's the leader's responsibility at a
right.
stage to continue and start to and then continue to upskill their employees on what's happening with AI and build off of it. You know, if they do lose their job,
Yeah.
they have that skill and they can say it.
That's right.
The other thing I would say, it's not your employees it's not just their responsibility.
Yes.
And I think we have a personal responsibility as honestly human beings
Yep.
right now at this moment in time, knowing what you know, that you need to be upskilling yourself.
That's right.
You know, it's funny. I spoke recently at the World Trade Center Institute, their big women's signature conference.
Awesome.
Right?
Yeah.
It was awesome. It was in front of 350 female executives from director to VP, SVP. Right? And I started off. I did initial keynote and then curated a panel of people who were actually using this stuff at Under Armour, Amazon, all the things. But what was really interesting was like when after the conversation, there were so many of them who were, because they were like in the middle management and some high levels, but middle management in a lot of ways. They haven't had these conversations with their employers. They don't know the strategy of the company, or if there is even one, right? And so we're putting together like a 6-part series for these women just to like, as something that we're hopefully going to partner with the World Trade Center Institute with, but it's to help them get started, not just like, here's how you create an AI agent. Right. You know, all that stuff is also very pertinent, don't get me wrong, but it's like really thinking about the secondary effects of all this stuff and what this means for you in work, what this means for, business, what this means for responsibility and bias and ethics, and how you can play a role in shaping this next phase, even in your own company. Yeah. Because there's a moment in time, right? That's right. So just curious, I mean, what is your thoughts about personal responsibility versus employer responsibility?
I can talk about this all day. I feel so strongly around the idea that personal advocacy and that personal ability to be able to lean in starts with how well am I willing to recognize that at times I may not know what questions to ask. Yeah. I think that's where I'm also getting when I do employee sentiment surveys, panels such as yourself that you mentioned. A lot of folks say, hey, Steph, I don't know what to ask. And so really looking at the landscape of what do you already know. You know how to be able to lead empowered teams, or you know how to be able to drive your career to this point. And so take what you do know and then bring that into the AI adoption perspective. What could this be, right? Being able to have an open mind perspective around it. What could this be when it comes to how I leverage AI in my role? Where could I read about, research, hear about others in my industry who may be taking a more innovative approach than I am currently? And then what's that 1 degree of separation that I can be able to think about? It's not going to happen without putting it on your calendar. Making time, because work is still happening. Yeah. Growth is still happening. Yeah. And so without prioritizing the time on your calendar, it can quickly become something that is gnawing in the back of my mind, but I am not empowering myself to be able to move the conversation forward in. So my biggest encouragement is always, how can you leverage the time that you have, what you already know, to be able to move the conversation forward?
I love that. I just think it's again, it is a dual responsibility right now. And I also think as you think about the secondary piece about your own personal responsibility, this is bigger than work, right? Yeah. This is, the way that we live life, the way that you raise your kids, that's right, what they're exposed to, or, so I think there's, I think we've learned from multiple emerging tech cycles, especially the last social media and digital age, right? And I think that this is that moment. So individual contributors, though, right? They could feel a little lonely, like, well, I don't have any say in any of this stuff. Sure. Like, is there a difference between a leader in an organization that may help and shape versus somebody who is kind of contributing to the greater good of a company around this AI stuff?
Yes. So I will say, and I'm going to look at the camera at this moment, this is where middle managers play a huge role. And leaders, how you lead your middle managers are going to be the differentiating factor between who wins in this age of AI and who gets left behind. So I wanted to say that very directly. And here's why. Because the middle managers who start to see their role from more of a systems design perspective and really take a step back to see what are we actually looking to accomplish and how can I be able to bring some of those individual contributors into the conversation, are going to see a much more invested workforce. Now, conversely, as an individual contributor, you don't have to wait for someone to come find you to do that. So I'll give a little bit about my own personal story. I don't have a technical background. I'm more of a product manager and then also HR and recruiting. That's my sweet spot. But I saw the writing on the wall and I knew that there was someone else who had a little bit more information around this than I did. And I got curious and then it opened up the opportunity from there. And so as someone who has walked through each stage from individual contributor to leader, etc., how you own your own advantage when it comes to this career process and how you own the internal resilience to pivot, because it may mean that there's going to be a different title that you operate in. You may need to have a different job function as you're growing and learning in that process. So we can be married to the growth, not necessarily to the title that we have. And that's going to keep us open as we move in that process. So,
that's a different mindset, though, Stephanie. Who thinks, I'm just asking, we don't think like that, right? And for someone, again, been through corporate and otherwise, like you always are like, all right, here's the career path.
Right, sure.
Right. Here's our tracks, and that's kind of how corporate and HR has thought about a lot of people in terms of succession planning and sort of like what's the next phase of their business, or their role in their company, right? But I'm gonna switch the segue a little bit to entry level. This is an ongoing conversation, so I love to have perspective from people, from college graduates to just getting a perspective of like, what should they be focused on? What does that hiring practice look like now? Because, for some companies, they do have AI. They're starting to really build that adoption out.
Right.
For others, you're in the messy middle, right? That's what I call it. But there's this reality of entry level could look different.
That's right.
So what are your perspectives on that?
Absolutely. So for anyone who is either entry level, I'm going to include in that career pivoters, where you're looking at moving into a newer area, maybe because of some changes that have happened in your career. Think about the career development process as iterative sprints, not a long journey, almost like a product roadmap where you're acquiring different skills along the way that is going to ultimately build you into the skill set toolbox that will help make you competitive in the roles. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of those entry-level roles where there was that process to learn alongside are becoming less. Now companies are looking more and more to have someone who can begin to produce from day one. So what I've been telling people is don't even wait until you have the degree. Don't wait until you've completed the program. Start building and ideating now. Start creating something and putting it into a system. Use Lovable to be able to create your landing page, create your app idea, and demonstrate where your curiosity may lie or what you're able to problem solve for. And then the second piece is getting really clear about not just the problem that you're able to solve because you're still new and earlier in your career process, but what is the environment that you can add value to? So as someone who's early in career, maybe you're a recent graduate or something of that nature, you have a really good sense of asking questions and curiosity, and that is necessary. That is a skill that may not be necessarily visible on your resume, but is super valuable. How have you demonstrated that curiosity, that resilience, and that tenacity that is necessary for companies to be able to succeed and thrive? Speak to that and be able to provide some insight around it.
Yeah, so do you think if I actually get to an interview, and actually I know a lot of people now are using AI processes to even get through resumes. I want to chat about that in a second, but if I even get through the interview, do you think me having, like, hey, I did some obvious research on the company, I understand some of the pain points, here's some ways that you can use AI to help with something, so solve something. Do you think that should be part of the conversation for any industry, or is it a nice to have? Like, what do you think right now?
It's a must have now. You have to come to the table, regardless of industry, with an idea about how AI is currently being leveraged, if it is, and then what are the changes or recommendations that you would make, and have a conversation and talking points around that. And that's irrespective of any industry. That's going to be healthcare, that's going to be finance and banking, whatever it is that you're applying to. Think about how AI can be a fundamental game changer in the role that you're considering. And worst case scenario, right? As someone who does a lot of interviewing, talks with a lot of folks, On the other side of the table, I'm hearing someone, even if we already have that, even if it's something we're already doing, I hear someone who's curious.
Yeah.
They're thinking, they're innovative. I know that if we need to make a change and pivot, which happens in any role, in any industry, this is someone who's already thinking from that perspective, and they have an aptitude to be able to pivot as needed. So absolutely, I don't feel like that's optional today. You have to come to the table with some insights around AI.
I love that. Are there any other skills that you think in this new world and AI era for the younger generation to come? You know, I heard innovative,
Right.
I heard curious. Is there anything else that they need to go deeper in now that the world is going to become more and more automated and, you know, in that way?
Absolutely. Collaboration, emotional intelligence, and a focus on high personal integrity. And I'll tell a little bit what I mean by that. From the collaboration standpoint, the more that we're leveraging AI and having that within our workflow process, the more of a premium we're going to place on that individual who's able to bring different individuals with different perspectives together to accomplish a certain goal. Those who have that skill sharpened are going to stand out because there's going to be less of a need to collaborate with certain aspects of our job. So when we do, it has to be very effective and focused. Of course, emotional intelligence, because there's always going to be that conversation between getting the work done, increasing viability, increasing revenue, and also working with people to be able to build an inclusive and thoughtful culture.
Yeah.
And then what I mean by high internal integrity is, how are we thinking about using AI? How are we thinking about what is maybe implicit bias that may be a part of what we didn't consider in the first round of this product, or what we didn't think about on the initial process? And who's going to raise their hand and say, hey, have we thought about this? Or hey, before we launch this product, have we really considered this user group? Or how have we really leveraged AI to make sure that this is highly accessible for the different ways that folks learn, for example? The individual who is able to bring that conversation to the table and to be able to have more of that internal integrity that says, hey, I want to make sure that we're keeping this in mind, are going to be the individuals that will be leading us into the next AI perspective.
I love that. That's courage.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
100%.
courage.
Yeah.
So I had a scenario, and I'm going to ask a couple scenarios. So again, I was at a speaking engagement, and we were talking about this entry-level situation. And one of the individuals, she leads a mid-sized company that's in architecture.
Nice.
They've done really well over the years. She's like, here's my problem. She's like, a lot of the AI tooling takes away, say it's 10, 12 years of experience. And what does she mean by that? She's like, I can walk into a room and I can look at the ceiling and be like, you know, this light fixture is off. This is off, whatever. Or this structure was done wrong. And she's like, that helps for multiple reasons of the work that they do.
Sure.
Right? Example is, there's some AI tools out there that are quote unquote doing it for the, you know, the entry level, or the, you know, even some of the middle management, but they lose that, you know, sort of the gut, the reaction, the knowing, you know, of like, this is right and wrong.
Right.
She's like, the AI may not always be right.
That's right.
Right. And so then it can create more work for, you know, that, you know, the next person who has to analyze or approve or trust and verify, whatever it may be. So I consider that this concept the messy middle, right? Because I actually think as we grow into this era, all businesses are going to have some level of intelligence. So this level, it will somehow get flattened. But right now, it's a real problem.
Right.
So what are your thoughts there? Like, how do we mitigate some of the risks that senior leaders see?
Sure.
Because now these junior folks, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Because a lot of that information, or just that processing, the critical thinking, now has been leveraged by that AI tool or AI platform.
That's right. So this is where I'm going to put the focus and real attention on our leaders. That it's still our responsibility to create space for learn as you go. Because part of the messy middle is, I value the voice that may not necessarily know all the why, but has good instinct. And that instinct can be developed, and I would say needs to be carved out as part of our workforce plan. So if I have someone who may be earlier in career, it causes me to have to take a real look at why we do what we do, being able to notice early on in the process, maybe the AI isn't giving us the information fully that's accurate. And it's forcing us to be able to really examine why we do the things that we do to then speed up. I think the idea that everything is going to be automated and taking away all of our early career opportunities is just as much a leadership challenge as an AI challenge. And as leaders, it is on us to make sure that if we are invested in the companies and organizations that we're building, that we are carving out a space for those who are coming alongside and thinking proactively of how to ideally add them into and integrate fundamentally into how we come up with solutions. The teams and the organizations that do that intentionally are the ones who are going to continue to stay ahead. I had a conversation with a startup not too long ago, and they had been in a phase where they just were needing to have new folks bringing ideas to the table.
Yeah.
And what I said to them was, hey, let's look at some clear projects that someone who's earlier in career can knock this out, can be able to contribute. But here's the other piece. I want you to bring them into the meetings. Let them hear how you're thinking. Explain. Don't just use those acronyms. Break them down, because what you're going to start to notice is you're going to have a vested group of people who really want to apply themselves because you've brought them into the conversation and are able to move forward that way.
Yeah. So let's go back to some of the foundations of this part of the conversation.
That's right.
AI upskilling, yes. Do we then now need industry upskilling too? You see what I'm saying about that?
Absolutely.
Like, because I was just thinking about it as we were just chatting. Because then, is there some fundamental education that that every employee, new employee, because we don't normally have that. It's like training on the job. It's like learning leadership skills. It's this, but maybe there's some foundational, if there's specific niche industries, that part of the onboarding then becomes like, you got to understand these fundamentals. Yeah. This is so important. And, nowadays you can take years of experience and condense it because of lessons learned and case studies and other things. And they will learn again along the way. But it's like, here are the things that you got to stay in tune of or pay attention to.
Yes.
Maybe there's a secondary piece of this upskilling. Any thoughts there?
Yeah. So what made me think about that when you mentioned it is, yes, with the mindset of having industry-specific training that can be transferable if needed. I believe that we're moving out of the idea that this is the only industry role or perspective that you will have for the rest of your career.
Oh, for sure.
The idea that you will be in this process of consistent linear growth, that is no longer the way that anyone, I think, should plan their career, or workforce planning even should consider. And so with that, yes, let's give you the fundamentals around an industry, but let's also help you get the why behind these decisions, so you can really understand what the implications can be, so that if you need to pivot, if you move, if things change, if workforce looks different 2 years from now, there's some fundamental skills around how we consider roles and opportunities that will always allow that individual to stay ahead of the game. So I think, yes, industry specific as needed, and being able to invest in how they walk through the process.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I also wanted to touch base now on is AI agents.
Yeah.
So again, this is a conversation I've had multiple times over in terms of where we're headed, right? So there's AI automations, which is really taking those laborious tasks that are repetitive and turning them into some sort of flow, right? So things that would take you hours can take you minutes. AI agents can bring a lot of tasks together, right, and create an outcome for you. They will be the new future of apps. Like, there are going to be millions of agents, either narrow focused or ecosystems, right? Just again, to level set. I say it, but it takes people, 13 times a year something to, go. But the reality is, and I think you and I chatted about this with one of my previous podcast guests, she truly asked her entire company, and they're a mid-sized company, to start tinkering with AI. Eventually, can you functionally help design what you think you're going to need from a finance perspective, marketing perspective, et cetera, with the new tooling that we see outside? They curated it. They're literally at a 35% ROI right now from the changes that they've made. But we got into the discussion about hiring. And she said, the program manager I used to hire, or even the project manager, now is different.
That's right.
And she said, now we have agents and people. And management around that is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there? How do you hire for that? Like, maybe just walk people through to even like, how does this journey in a company get there? And then what are you going to do to hire differently in that state?
Absolutely. So I think first, fundamentally recognizing that how we think about workforce is going to be people and agents. It's just a matter of when you and your company begin to think about it from that perspective. So the earlier you can kind of settle that, the more we can look at what that looks like. And for someone who hasn't started to consider that, think about what is the agent, if you haven't used it yet, or what could an agent be able to produce from a data and ROI standpoint, right? So kind of going back to the earlier part of our conversation, now that we've explored what some of the administrative tasks or what can be automated, what's the ROI specifically from those agents, and what does that convert to when it comes to time saved for the people on my team? And I can be able to look at both of those. It's going to help me get a sense of what it is that my team is able to accomplish in less time or be able to accomplish at a greater or more scalable level. So that's kind of the first, wrapping your arms around it. The second piece is we have to look fundamentally at how we define job descriptions and how we look at performance evaluations. Because now that job description needs to include some aspect of whatever your role is, leveraging AI within the actual format of what you do, and empowering others on your team to be able to do so as well. You've got to bring folks along in that journey as a fundamental part of how you consider the job. And then also, how are we looking at performance metrics? Because now it's not just that you did the job. How did you leverage AI to be able to do it quicker or to be able to do it with more accuracy? And were there any places where there were inaccuracies that you noticed? Did you flag that? So now we're really thinking about, from a talent management perspective and a hiring perspective, how can we think about having AI as a baked in part of our expectation? So that's kind of like the second layer as folks are kind of thinking through that. And then finally, it's what are some of the roles that need to fundamentally change in order for us to stay competitive? For example, we mentioned marketing. Another role that is fundamentally going to change and expand is how we think about product managers.
Yeah.
So now, from a product management standpoint, we can think about where can we have a product manager be deeply embedded in the process, but also leverage AI to make some of those daily sprints or what's updated in Figma be able to happen at a quicker rate so that that individual can better support the engineering team or be able to get solutions moving forward more quickly.
No, those are super helpful. I mean, I have a couple of people I'm talking to right now who are younger companies.
Yep.
And they're like, look, our goal is that we're not going to hire for things that we believe we can automate.
That's right.
We want to literally be 80% automated. Literally, before I got here, there was a conversation about, look, this is a process that I would normally hire for. It's an analysis of a client profile. And then they had a whole proposal process. And normally that would be a role.
Sure.
And he's like, I just want you guys to create an agent for me. And I want that now to be part of it. And then we're going to go to the next and then go to the next, right? And that's how people are thinking.
Yes.
Right? It's just it's a very interesting, and people are at, again, different places, different times.
Sure.
But that's where things are headed.
Absolutely.
So if I was thinking about a human-centric adoption strategy for the next 30 days, what would you be recommending to a leader?
Absolutely. So I always recommend starting with where you are first. Where are you in your own personal AI adoption journey as it relates to what you're hoping to see accomplished? Because we can only lead to the extent that we ourselves are honest about where we are. How are you feeling? What are the questions that you have? Because more than likely, your team is going to reflect those questions as well. So get grounded in where you are. Secondly, what is that OKR, or what is that goal that we've already established we want to be able to accomplish by the end of the fiscal year for those who are in their fiscal year planning? And then we can think about how AI can help us be able to meet that metric more quickly, under budget, or having some kind of way that AI can be able to think around that. And what I'm establishing is a framework and a pattern that we can then use in messaging. Third piece, and I mentioned this a little earlier, is as you're ideating, don't put anything in concrete just yet, bring an AI brain trust around you. And here are a few folks that I think are fundamental to be a part of that. You need to have, yes, your technologist, but who's your strategist? How we're implementing this. This is going to be also the person who's going to get real honest about your finances, right? And making sure, like, what is it going to cost us to be able to implement this across the board? Of course, having your HR and workforce planning perspective in there at that table as well as your ethicist who's thinking about things from a responsible AI perspective, and then your communicator. That person's key, and I often see them missed, is how are we messaging this to our employees, or if we're public, how are we messaging this to our stakeholders so it's clear what we can be able to accomplish, and also being able to help set some expectations as well.
Yeah, I think the fundamental piece, this is a change management issue and challenge. This
That's right.
more than anything.
Yeah.
Right? Workforce planning, leveraging AI is a change management exercise. At the end of the day, comms is the most important thing.
Yeah.
That's what's going to
100%.
cause the uncertainty, the scariness, the fear, the resentment. And if you do it right,
That's right.
you can bring them along in the journey.
Yeah. 100%. And if you haven't thought about what you want your table stakes to be around the communication strategy, I would say that's the place where the biggest gap or opportunity for mistakes can occur.
Yeah.
Because once it's said, it takes a lot of energy to be able to then redirect it. So how proactive we are as leaders, and this is what I was actually talking to someone recently about this. What is your strategy around some of the fears and concerns, but also how are you painting the picture of what the future can potentially look like?
Yeah. And I think you did a great job from an enterprise, sort of mid-sized company side. Can we take a stab at more of an entrepreneurial side?
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't think they're going to have an ethicist. They're not going to, they are the ethicists.
That's
they
right.
are the responsible
Right,
AI.
exactly.
They're the janitor in chief.
Yep.
So is there a difference in the startup mentality than there is in what you shared with that framework? Anything that would be different?
Yeah, so I would say it's going to be scrappier and a little grittier,
Yeah.
right? And so leverage the resources that are available to you that will save you time and build your ROI. That's how we're going to really kind of just boil it down to brass tacks first. And leveraging as many free resources as you can, right? This is where kind of what we mentioned earlier, whether it's Claude or you're using ChatGPT Pro, or you want to be able to have a landing page and you want to use Lovable or Cursor if you have some background in coding. What I'm mentioning are tools in your tech stack that you can be able to leverage without a lot of time, because we know as entrepreneurs who has additional time, right? I talked to quite a few folks. But if you can be able to focus it in the areas that are going to save you time, my guess is those are going to be around payroll, financing, administrative tasks, calendar, sales. Those are areas that I usually talk with folks around starting there first, because you're going to see immediate return on your time. And then being able to think about what can help drive more ROI. So now you can use AI to think about how clear are you about your team hiring if you're going to be adding folks to your team. Where are the SOPs? Do they live on a SharePoint or an Excel spreadsheet somewhere?
Yeah.
Or is it systematized? Do we have it centralized in Notion where everyone can be able to see what our process is? Or does it live in a Slack channel that no one goes to, right? So that's kind of what I would encourage our more scrappy entrepreneurs to think about from that perspective.
I think this is such a game-changing moment for startups.
That's right.
It's game-changing.
That's right.
Because, again, I'll always use this janitor-in-chief visual where, you're doing every hat in the book.
Right.
Because then you're trying to do that and love on your clients and, all the other things.
Right.
Build your personal brand and all the things. But this can really streamline if you're thoughtful about it and change the way you do business, change the way you operate fundamentally.
100%.
Which then can help you accelerate. And I love that, in terms of we say highest impact, highest ROI, lowest effort when it comes to AI is the strategy and structure we use, which is exactly the same as what you just shared. But it is a game changer. So, my world and the community loves use cases.
Yeah.
And almost like learning from what worked and what didn't.
Sure.
So could you maybe share some stories or things that you've heard that, man, they fundamentally did this wrong?
Yeah.
And then they fundamentally did this right.
Absolutely. So I'm a CEO that I was chatting with. They really wanted to be able to move AI clearly forward with their teams. And so they had a town hall, and the conversation was, we're going to let you pick the AI agent vehicle that you want to use. And we want to see who can be able to kind of be able to create, they were using it for their sales automation process. We want to see who can be able to have the best ROI. In their mind, this is incentivizing teams, this is getting folks, excited about using it. But what happened was they ended up having one team that leveraged ChatGPT, another team that leveraged Claude, another team that leveraged Notion AI, and you started to have very siloed systems because each system is going to give you different information and each one is going to give you a different ROI that's not necessarily comparable in all ways. And so what we came back and had the conversation around is instead of having them all pick the tooling, let's establish the basic tool that we need, but let's have each team be able to think about what their personal North Star is around ROI, and then we can be able to come together and discuss. And so that was something where I was like, oof, that was a little challenging, but we were able to come back and bring the conversation to more central.
Yeah, and then personal ROI, I always look at it, what's the biggest business challenge, business outcome, right? So it's just, and that's the way to think about this stuff, right? It's like, because if you're just thinking about it as a technology or a quick automation, that's not going to be the end game. The end game is you're solving a real problem.
That's right. Absolutely.
And then that problem's leading to ROI or acceleration in some capacity.
Fundamentally.
And then so that's something that they did wrong but adjusted.
Yeah. Yes.
What about right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So this is where, working with another team, I saw them begin to think proactively about fundamentally restructuring how they built out their team. And so I was talking to another leader, and their team specifically was around not just product marketing, but how they thought around security protocols with product marketing. And from day one, they invited their employees to think about if you could have a partner or if you could have someone who is a leader with you do your job for you, so you could be freed up to do something else, what would you have them do? And then they had each person be able to at least describe it so they could create an agent around it, and they looked for similarities. What that did, Seema, was because these employees were able to submit their ideas, especially around the nuances of customer feedback, because that was really what the ROI was. How quickly can we get customer feedback and identify what change needs to be made in the product? They were able to see a 40% increase in their ROI in less than 6 months.
Wow.
Because those agents were then able to get them not just information, it could systematize the data that it provided, and they were able to then distill what was needed for the customer to get the end result. So that was something for me that was just a great demonstration of how, if you rate, the employees were included, they were a part of the process from the beginning. And then AI was able to be leveraged to get a better result for the customers.
And I think a key here, too, if you don't have that internal sort of navigation, the person to have those conversations, there's always experts outside.
That's right.
To really help navigate those conversations. We do this all the time, right? Because it's important, again, going back to, you don't know what you don't know.
That's right.
And connecting, I love I love that strategy, right? As long as it's like going back to one of the first things that you said, it doesn't fall to the wayside.
That's right.
Like there is an execution plan, or there is comms that says, hey, we're going to take the top 10 ideas or something around that.
Yeah.
And then one other thing that you mentioned earlier, which reminded me of Google.
Yes.
Google used to always give like their employees, I think it's 10% of the time, to think about something that they're interested in innovating or R&D, right? So, you had that permission.
That's right.
And it's almost like giving your employees permission to take 10%, 15% even, like how would you automate this stuff? What then could your job look differently if you opened up the time for yourself, and what are the things that you've been wanting to work on so bad that now you can?
That's right.
And it would be more fulfilling and more exciting for you, and you would see more incentive both personally and to the company.
That's right.
Right? And I think that would be interesting.
And then I just want to add something there, because I noticed that sometimes we say, oh, free you up to do, and the employee is like, to do what?
Yeah.
This is my job.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You're freeing up my time. What am I supposed to go do? This is what I was doing. And so then also using AI to help ideate that part of the process, where how can we reimagine what your skill set and scope could look like going forward? Because as an employee, that can feel very intimidating and overwhelming without support. So if this has been freed up, if this has been automated, then help me also think about where the opportunities and possibilities could be.
Stephanie, I'd love to work on a framework with you and be able to give it to this community.
That would
because
be
I think
amazing.
it's just like there's certain steps that are sort of fundamental we've talked about.
Yeah.
And you're a framework queen, by the way.
I love a framework. I love a framework. Yes, 100%.
No, that's good, right? Because I think about AIM. I'm thinking about the things that you're saying, and that's helpful, right? That's very helpful because, obviously you've done this multiple times over, right? You've seen what's worked, what hasn't, and we're early.
Yes.
Right? But at the same time, we're not early.
Right.
And this sort of level of, all right, where do we start? What are the questions I should even be asking? What does my future of workforce look like? And what does the job individually look like? I mean, these are fundamental things. It is overwhelming if you don't have that information up front or you're not thinking about it.
That's right. That's right.
Because
Absolutely.
so I'd love to chat with you on that.
That would be amazing.
Let's get into some rapid fire.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. What is the most overrated AI role right now?
The software engineer focused on prompt engineering.
Why?
Because the software engineer, prompt engineers combination right now is really where you're seeing the fastest iteration and updates. What I'm loving to see is that for our software engineers, they're really being empowered to think at a broader level around the creativity and how we can be able to move the process forward, not just being able to fix some of the troubleshooting side on the back end.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. One job description that no longer works in its old form.
Marketing specialist or product marketing specialist. I would evolve that to AI marketing strategist or AI product marketing manager. And we're starting to actually see that more reflected in workforce planning processes, meaning that there's going to be now a way that the individual who does these jobs is thinking about AI as part of their role.
Have you seen Y Combinator has put on job descriptions that specifically just ask for AI agents, no humans allowed?
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Did I teach you something
No,
new?
I had seen that they had made that update, but I didn't see that it had gone live yet. That's amazing. Oh my goodness. That's amazing.
Chandler Malone, one of my other podcasts, shared it with me, and I just started laughing. I'm like, man, we're going to start to see that.
Yeah.
And that's an actually opportunity for entrepreneurs because, I have that agent for you.
That's right.
Let it come and
Get the
do
job
that
done.
interview and get the job done.
That's right.
That's funny. Okay.
Interesting.
Finish this. If your AI strategy doesn't include your people, it's just
going to fall behind and you're going to lose your company. And I know that sounds harsh, but I want to say it with the gravity and also empathy that statement hopefully holds, which is your people are going to be the answer to what you're looking for. They're thinking about it already. They have an idea somewhere on a spreadsheet, or they're thinking about what this solution could be, and creating space for them to share is going to be a game changer.
You know, I love what you just said because I think even pre-AI, they probably have thought about what if.
Yes.
And now if they actually understood what the technology could do, they're
That's right.
like, oh my God, I didn't even know.
That's right.
And connecting those dots
That's
to
right.
empower them. I love that.
100%.
Most powerful leadership skill in the AI era.
Empathetic communication. Oof. How we communicate change with empathy and awareness and inclusion is going to be the differentiator for companies, and it's going to be the differentiator of how we think about workforce today.
I love that. I love that. One AI myth that you wish would die.
That you're too late. We're in the middle of it. We're in the messy middle, as you mentioned.
That's my phrase.
We're not too late for those who are willing to shed what you thought you knew.
Yeah.
Because even those of us who feel that we are pretty ahead of the game when it comes to AI adoption, what we knew last year, I had no idea job descriptions were being provided just for agents, right? Shed what you know.
Right.
And stay curious and bring others along in the conversation. There's still time to be able to change the game of how we approach AI, especially from a workforce planning standpoint.
Shed what you know.
Shed what you know.
Reimagine the process.
That's right.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. If I was hiring this year and I was a founder or a CEO, what's one fundamental thing that I should change?
How you think about the interview process when it comes to AI. So when I think about the interview process now, it can be pretty tedious, it can be pretty lengthy, and you may not necessarily always have clarity as an applicant or as a leader. Leveraging AI, not just to distill resumes, but really getting clear about allowing folks to show their personality. I want to see companies start using AI to have video interviews. How can we integrate someone's strength profile along with their skill set? How can we think differently about how we evaluate talent? Because there's lots of talented folks in the market, and I think how we think creatively about that using AI is going to bring stronger folks to your team. That person who maybe had a stint at a startup and then went and launched something else and then wants to come back to a role, that's showing a lot of creativity. That's showing a lot of ability to navigate. Someone who's returned to office after being what I call a stay-at-home CEO, right? Because we know that's one of the toughest jobs you can do. Yeah. How can we be able to use AI to think inclusively about who we hire so that we're not just looking for one linear profile, one linear background, one linear piece of expertise, but we're looking to mine for the talent and the skill that that person already has. Because if you are helping a startup, there's valuable skill set there. There's also a valuable skill set if you are former military and you're pivoting into a new career, because it takes courage, it takes guts, and it takes insight. So I would love to see companies really think about how to use AI to really find that skill set that may look a little different than you expect, but is a great hire.
I love that answer, and I want to probe.
Yeah,
I know this is supposed to be rapid fire.
This is my jam. I love it.
I know.
Yes.
I have one fundamental question, because there's always this art of being able to scrape public behavior, public data.
Sure.
So when you say look for their skill, sometimes you can't just take that out from a resume. And my understanding for a lot of companies now are they're using AI to go through their resumes. They're not doing it in a human, like there's humans in the loop, but it comes to, here's the top resumes or whatever, right? Is it legal?
Yeah.
If I was like, maybe you wanted to hire me, I'm making this up, right? But you did this public scraping of me, and you're like, wow, like, is she X, Y, and Z, or she's very good, but here, it's just an analysis.
Right.
That adds to what you know in an interview or what is coming out through the actual, process of hiring. Yeah. Is that okay?
My legal and compliance spidey senses are going off on that. And here's why. Because while no system is perfect, if we're only scraping the information that's available publicly, and we're not giving that person an opportunity, even if it's just a video, to share who they are, to share what projects they've worked on, to share why this company, then one, on a hiring standpoint, we're missing a fundamental piece. But on the back end, from a compliance standpoint, if we're only pulling from what exists, then we're going to be having some built-in bias there, because there's certain representation in certain industries that's been consistent. And if you want to change the representation, you have to change the model of how you're acquiring talent. And so I always think about, if I had to stand up and give an argument legally as to why we are doing this, how can I be able to speak to how are we inclusively thinking about talent? How are we having an evaluation process that is considering all the ways that people have different accessibility processes, right? If I'm only asking, for example, this was one of the use cases, if I'm only asking someone to be able to do a test on camera, well, that's not necessarily inclusive if someone has a different way of learning or a different way of sharing. So is even my methodology legal to be able to make sure that it's continuing to consider folks from an accessibility standpoint? And can I stand behind the result? That's the piece that I always like to think about whenever it comes from the workforce planning and the legal compliance standpoint, because there has to be a way that we can speak to the consistency of it, and we can be able to evaluate, is this working, and do we have a way to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to at least be considered, right? I can't guarantee you'll get the job. It's you being considered for the opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a different pod.
Yeah.
Because I think that the evaluation of hires, of what the roles look like in the AI era is just a different method. It's a different strategy. So I will let us come back on that.
That's a good topic. I get very, as you can see, get very passionate about how we think about who we bring to the table and who gets to have the opportunity to even have that interview, right? Because as we all know, especially with where the market is, it can be a lot of process just to get to the interview. So we want to give as many folks as possible the opportunity to bring their best selves to that interview.
No, I love that. Stephanie, listen, it was a pleasure having you on the AI CEO podcast.
This was such a pleasure.
You know, this is one of those topics that can make a lot of people nervous.
Sure.
You know, and there's, again, so much uncertainty around it, but like, I don't think anybody, not anybody, I don't think a majority are thinking about the impact on workforce yet. Again, we're in the know, you know, the ones who are, I don't know how in depth they've gone, or, you know, some of the nuances that you shared, I think are going to be really great golden nuggets for the community members who are listening in and the leaders that are really trying to take this phase into the next level. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was such a pleasure.
And you're all over social and other things. How can they find you?
Absolutely. So Steph Shabazz is my social media. And I also have a giveaway that I do for all of the CEOs or leaders who are thinking proactively around AI. So just follow me there and my team will be able to send that out to you. And I will say this, as a leader, you know how to fundamentally lead with empathy, to lead with joy, to lead with curiosity. And that's what your team is looking for, especially in the age of AI.
Oh, Stephanie, listen, thank you again.
Absolutely.
And for those of you listening, I know you got a lot of gold out of this episode. So make sure you comment, share, and like the episode. And we will see you next week.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That's a wrap for this episode of the AI CEO podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. It helps me reach more leaders like you and continue bringing in top AI-first founders, industry experts, and visionary CEOs to share their insights. AI is evolving fast, and the CEOs who harness it today will lead tomorrow. Stay ahead of the curve, keep learning, and keep building. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.